Hello, I'm Naim Kurt and welcome to Upstart Live. My guest today has been described as, in the media, as one of the most influential people in higher education. He's an internationally renowned family law specialist, a researcher, a graduate of the University of Oxford who taught at the universities of Lancaster and Warwick in the UK and worked for the London law firms Allen and Overy and Farrar & Co. He has held senior leadership positions at Griffith University and the University of Melbourne, where he was provost before taking on the role of Vice-Chancellor of La Trobe. Professor John Dewar, it's a pleasure to have you here on Upstart Live.
It's great to be here.
I'd like to start off talking about the higher education sector. We know we're really in a continuing flux and change in the higher education sector at the moment. We've had sweeping changes proposed in the way universities will operate, and that's been in discussion in the wider community and the university as well. One of the biggest announcements last week, excluding the announcement of a federal election, of course, was the federal budget, and within the forward estimates, I believe there's still a $2 billion reduction in university funding that's been mentioned.
Yeah.
These cuts will obviously have to come from somewhere, whether that be students paying more or through staff cuts or a decrease in quality in the kind of education we receive. How does the university plan to meet these kinds of cuts should the government follow through on them? Well,
we don't know yet that there will be cuts to what the universities receive. This is an issue that the government has said it wants to consult on. The main ingredients of last week's announcement were that full fee deregulation is off the table, and I think the government wanted to neutralise the opposition's attack on the 2014 budget package, which of course drew very strong opposition. So to that extent it could be seen as a bit of a political move to just lower the heat around that issue. But you're right, they've still said there are in fact $2.6 billion worth of cuts across the forward estimates to the higher education sector. The question now is, how are they going to achieve those cuts? Now, with full fee deregulation off the table, it's clearly not going to come from an unlimited increase in student fees or contributions. So the question is, where will it come from? And there are really only two choices in those circumstances. One is that universities just bear the cost and cut everything by 20%. The other is that students pay more, that when the government withdraws its subsidy, it's replaced by a higher student contribution. Now, the government actually hasn't announced what it intends to do with all of this, and they will be creating an expert advisory group, assuming they get returned, of course, after the election, to advise them on what the final shape of the package should look like. They then face the challenge, of course, of getting that through whatever the Senate looks like after the double dissolution election, and I'm not certain that the new Senate is going to be any more sympathetic to these changes than the old.
You have been one of the more outspoken members in the higher education sector, or the Vice-Chancellors on the higher education reform package that was proposed, I think, back in 2014. Even though it's been temporarily shelved, as we were talking about, I did notice in the discussion package there is plans to reintroduce the package in 2017 in consultation with stakeholders. As one of those stakeholders, what will you be arguing for with the government, and how hard will you be pushing for the implementation of the higher education reform package?
Well, the package in its original form has now essentially been withdrawn, so and the government, through this options paper, has signalled that it plans to proceed with a slightly different model. I'm actually starting to think that there is a completely alternative option to everything that the government is talking about, which is that we recap the system. So at the moment we have a demand-driven system, and one of the problems for government has been that has led to a huge increase in university enrolments. I think the sector since 2008 has probably grown by the equivalent of 3 or 4 universities the size of Monash. So the sector has absorbed a lot more students. I'm starting to think that we may have reached a logical point at which to say, that's enough growth, let's just constrain that growth now. We've met most of the unmet demand in the system, and achieve the government's fiscal objectives that way, rather than cutting what universities receive.
We've had such a decrease in the mining boom. That was the last big boom in our economy, and the education sector was really supposed to be the next big boom. If they're capping the education sector, we're not going to get that benefit and flow on into the community.
No, and I mean, Universities Australia has been advocating for increased investment in higher education. We're already one of the lowest nations in the OECD in terms of proportion of GDP invested in higher education. So there is a very strong argument that actually government should be putting in more. The problem is neither side of politics, well, neither of the main parties at any rate, the Greens are an exception, is actually advocating that. They're either advocating keeping it where it is or reducing it.
When you begin speaking with politicians and the government about should the current government be re-elected, will you be pushing or advocating for the capping of university places, or would you be speaking for, again, on the deregulation of university fees?
Well, as I say, I think deregulation is now off the agenda. There just isn't enough political
So you would not
support.
be pushing for that
Well,
in discussions with the government?
If we step outside the political debate, I think there are two options that the Australian community confronts about how to fund its higher education system properly. One is to ask students to pay more, and as I've said, the government may end up in that place, but in a capped student contribution system. So you just withdraw 20% and then you increase what students pay by 20%, and that would be that, leaving universities no better off or no worse off than they were before. That's the sort of solution that we're looking at now. There are other alternatives. One is recapping the system, the other is fully deregulating fees, and those were the alternatives that we were confronting until last week's budget, really. And I think at the bottom, the choice you make between those two depends on how strongly you believe in the demand-driven system. If you think the demand-driven system is fundamentally a good thing, then you probably go for a deregulated
What would be
option.
your thinking, though, on the
Well,
issue?
actually, my thinking is starting to shift. Actually,
Okay.
yeah. I was, as you said, a very strong advocate of full fee deregulation. I can explain why. But I'm actually starting to think that the level of unmet demand is now so low, and that the choices that individual universities are starting to make in order to exploit the demand-driven system are starting to be, I think, not aligned with the national interest. I mean, some universities in this state, for example, have opened up new law schools. I don't think Victoria really needed an 8th law school, and yet there was nothing to stop them doing it. And that is happening in a lot of different disciplines, and I'm starting to think that maybe it's time to start pulling that back.
Have ATARs been lowered at La Trobe?
They've been lowered everywhere. I mean, to the extent that an ATAR is a market signal of the equilibrium or otherwise between supply and demand. What the demand-driven system has done is increase the supply, and that means that the price measured by ATAR is going to drop, and that's been true across the sector.
When we have drops in the ATAR, people coming into the universities will have less of an academic rapport, and they'll have trouble sometimes adapting to the university lifestyle when they haven't had the higher ATAR as some other people.
Yeah.
What is La Trobe doing to make sure that those people coming in at a lower level can match it with the rest of the students, and we're not just setting them up to fail, just to pay money and fail in their degrees?
So I just take a little bit of issue with what you've just said, because it's not entirely true. There is certainly a point at which a low ATAR does, according to the data, appear to affect student success over the long term. When you're getting into the 50s, that's when it appears to look as though it starts to have an impact. Above that, there is no strong correlation between the ATAR on entry and performance of students during and at the end of their degree. So it's really that cohort.
So someone coming in for an ATAR of 60 should be able to compete just as well as someone for 95?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, we've traditionally thought of some degrees as high ATAR because there's been such high demand. So our dentistry degree in Bendigo, for example, has an ATAR of 98 or something, incredibly high. It's one of the highest ATAR requirements in the state. Now, you do need to be smart to do dentistry, there's no doubt about that. But a student with an ATAR of 88 could complete a dentistry course just as well as a student with 98. It's set at 98 because of the demand and the supply.
There still needs to be services, though, to support people coming in who can match it with
Yeah.
and get through to universities without any difficulty.
Yes.
And how is La Trobe addressing that?
Yes, so in lots of different ways. We have a lot of services for students, learning support, language support where that's relevant, as well as the supplementary learning for students where they feel that their learning needs to be improved. We have a lot of support for particular cohorts of students. So, for example, Indigenous students have their own support unit. We have support for disabled students, quite good support here at La Trobe. And we have a range of programs to support students from disadvantaged schools and disadvantaged backgrounds as they transition into university, preparing them to be successful at university. So I think La Trobe actually has a very good track record of not just being an inclusive university, but actually helping those students
Where does the
succeed.
LTLT, the La Trobe Learning and Teaching Department, fit into all of this?
Well, their job is to support high quality learning and teaching across the whole university. They're very engaged at the moment in supporting the rollout of our digital learning strategy, which really means promoting the use of blended learning across the university. Otherwise, they engage in quality improvement where a need for quality improvement has been identified. But they do also include some learning support staff as well. So
Well, I understand that the LTLT there is a proposal to get rid of some of the positions there. I think 38 positions from the.
there is a restructure.
A restructure?
That's true. I don't think we're going to lose 38 learning support staff, however.
No.
But that's still out for consultation, so I don't know where we'll land on that.
And would you believe that would have any follow-on effects to students, like we talked before, people coming from a less of an academic background without having those services there to upskill teachers so they can deal with those students and get them learning in the correct fashion?
Well, that's certainly not the intention, obviously. We want to continue to be a university that supports students from all backgrounds to be successful. As I said, it's out for consultation and we'll have to wait and see where that lands.
You've, like we said before, you were a big supporter of the higher education reform package. You said, your mind's kind of changing on that. Did you have the support of the wider university in moving forward with those proposals?
Probably not.
I'm advised.
Probably not.
I've been told that probably the University Council didn't give you the endorsement for that.
Look,
Did you have the full support of the University Council?
there were some robust discussions, yes. I mean, different council members have different views. In the end, though, my views aligned with the rest of the sector. I was not alone. There was one Vice-Chancellor who opposed the package, but 38 Vice-Chancellors in the Universities Australia group all supported it. So I was not the only one. I was perhaps both more vocal about it, and because I come from a non-group of 8 university, I guess that got more attention. But I wasn't by any means on my own in the sector.
Surely, in your role as Vice-Chancellor, you should be really representing the views of the university, and especially the University Board. If you're advocating for reforms there, and we know if another government comes in, you have to go to the government again and speak in consultation with them with further higher education reform. Surely it's in your role as Vice-Chancellor, you should be representing the university as a whole and making sure your representations are in consultation with the University Council.
Well, there are different views about that.
Okay.
I mean, I saw my role as being to advocate for what I saw as the best interests of the university. Now, I know that a lot of people didn't agree with how I assessed where the best interests lay, and it's a complicated argument, but at bottom, I felt that if we continue with the system as it is at the moment, that will continue to put a lot of pressure on universities that are less prestigious than the group of 8. There is enormous pressure on every institution to grow or somehow to increase its revenue. Without fee deregulation, the only way to increase revenue is through growth. And growth in the long run is going to harm some of the weaker institutions. There are already some institutions in this state. There was one, I won't name it, but there was one that posted a financial statement for last year that for the second year running posted a deficit. There are some institutions in the current system that are under real strain. My view was that the only way in which the only option that was open to us at the time was to release that pressure, was to give the more prestigious universities the opportunity to deregulate fees because they could increase their revenue without increasing the number of students they took, and that would take the pressure off other institutions in the system. That was, given the options available to us at the time, my genuine view about where the best interests of this university lay. There was no way in which La Trobe was ever going to be able to take extensive advantage of fee deregulation, but if it meant that Melbourne and Monash took fewer students, that was certainly in our interests. So it's a complicated argument, but in the end, having thought about it a lot, I formed the view that in the interests of this institution, that it was in La Trobe's interests, counterintuitive though it may sound, to have supported it. And there were members of the governing body who agreed with me.
One of the biggest hallmarks of your time at La Trobe has been the Future Ready initiative.
Yep.
And under the initiative in 2014, I think it was around 300 staff which were cut from jobs, which was probably about a fifth of the workplace here. We had a merging of 5 of the major colleges down to 2.
Yep.
And basically all administrative inquiries have been moved into the Ask La Trobe model. And it has become really a one-stop shop for students across campus. Now, because of this, students don't have access to the specialist staff, the office staff that they used to have. Law students can't go to a law office where there's experienced people who know about law internships. You have to go to Ask La Trobe. It's the same for us in the journalism department. And I've heard stories before from one girl who had to go to the Ask La Trobe 6 times to get an answer, coming in and out 6 times, and now it's just made her opinion of whether she should continue studying at La Trobe. She's got a much lesser opinion now because of the difficulty she's had in getting answers and getting pushed around. What is the university doing at the moment to provide a better system so students can get the appropriate answers they need without getting pushed around and getting more stressed, interfering with their studies?
So again, if I could just correct one factual assertion you made there, the proportion of staff that we had to shared in the Funding Future Ready process was about 10%. It wasn't a fifth.
A fifth?
So you
10%.
You kind of doubled it. But
my apologies.
That aside, the Ask La Trobe was and is designed to, as you said, to provide students with a one-stop shop. It was quite a revolutionary model in terms of practice in the sector. We know that there are teething problems with it, absolutely, and I'm not going to pretend that there aren't, but I also know that the team in Ask La Trobe are working incredibly hard to improve the quality of the service that students receive. And I think I've certainly heard many positive stories about Ask La Trobe. I'm sure there will always be problems, and there will always be students who experience repeat visits and don't get resolution, but it is designed to improve the quality of services students receive. Now, if that's not happening, we need to know, and we will do everything we can to fix it. But one of the features of the old system was that it did bounce students around between different areas, and Ask La Trobe was designed to solve that problem. So we remain determined to improve the quality of services for students. And as I said, if there are instances where that's not happening, then we need to know about them.
Out of interest, how many courses and subjects does La Trobe now offer compared to 2014 when the staff cuts took place?
Look, the number of courses and subjects we offer changes every year, and it was changing before that, and it continues to change. We reshape our program offerings literally every year. It's an annual process. So we did reduce the number of degrees. Most of them were degrees that had small numbers of students in them. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of where we started in all of this. When I took over in 2012, the university was not in a stable financial situation. In fact, when we projected our budget forward in 2013, it became clear that if we did nothing to contain our costs, our projected revenue meant that the university would literally run out of money by the end of 2017. That we would post a series of deficits, and that if we funded those deficits from cash reserves, our money would run out by the end of next year. Now, we couldn't let that happen. No responsible CEO or leader of an organisation can allow that organisation to disappear through financial frailty. So we knew we had to take action and to do so urgently. And that's what led to the 2014 restructure. And that was partly about cutting costs, and unfortunately, most of our operating budget goes on staffing, about 80% probably. So we have to lose staff if we're going to cut costs. But we used that as an opportunity to modernise the university. La Trobe had not really been through a comprehensive modernisation process. I've been in 2 other universities in the Australian sector, and certainly one of them, Griffith University, went through an equivalent to what we did in 2014 as long ago as 1998. So by the standards of the rest of the sector, La Trobe had fallen a long way behind. So we used the need to save money, to cut our operating budget, as an opportunity simultaneously to modernise.
Do you believe the Future Ready program has been a success?
Look, I think some of it has. I think the new academic operating model is working well. I think the new college structure generally gets a lot of support. I think the heads of school feel much more empowered now to lead their disciplines and to drive initiatives in their area. Our research performance is rapidly improving. We're one of the most rapidly improving research universities in the sector.
How do you assess whether it's been a success or not?
Well, by how well the university performs, essentially. And that performance is across a range of measures, all of which are set out in the strategic plan. I think the area where we're not performing well at the moment is in terms of how students rate us. And that was the case before the reforms.
I did notice that because I tried to look up the student satisfaction surveys and they only go up to 2013. So is there any reason why they aren't available post then?
Well, the 2014 survey has just been released. So if you look on the Quilt website, you'll find it. That's the Quality Indicators of Learning and Teaching, which is the government website.
Is that always a 2-year?
There is always a lag, yes.
A lag, okay.
Yeah, it's because, I won't go into the detail, but the most recent survey is of students who graduated in 2014. So we monitor our performance against a whole range of metrics, and in the end, that will be...
Is there any external companies coming in to review the Future Ready program?
Yeah, well, yes, we have PricewaterhouseCoopers doing an evaluation of the operating model that we established.
And PricewaterhouseCoopers, they did the original implementation of the Future Ready?
They supported us, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the original implementation was actually done within the university. It wasn't PricewaterhouseCoopers. They advised us. They identified the areas where we had an opportunity to cut costs. They advised us on how to run the whole project. But in the end, the project was actually done by staff in the university.
If they advised you on the changes beforehand and now they're coming in again to do the review, isn't there a conflict of interest in there in that
Absolutely
they're reviewing the same program?
I think it suits. It means that they're the best suited because they understand what we were trying to do. We don't need to bring them up to speed in the way that we would with other consultants that we might bring in. The purpose of the review is not to say, did we do the right thing? Because there is no going back on this. We have to make it work. The purpose of the review is, how do we make it work better than it is at the moment? So, given that they were well acquainted with what we sought to do, we thought they were ideally placed to come and advise us on how well we've gone since they were here last.
One question I did have from students, I put it on social media beforehand.
Yeah.
They spoke about your salary. It's a bit of a touchy subject, but they said, how can someone be justified in laying off all these staff when they have such a huge salary? I think from what I looked up, it was something like $800,000, and you have a house allowance and a car allowance. That's obviously a much more than your average citizen. It's even more than the Prime Minister of Australia. How would you justify that to students or those further out in the university community?
Well, again, if I could just correct you, I don't have a house allowance, but I actually took a pay cut during the year we were going through funding Future Ready, unfortunately, because we changed the way we report these things, it didn't show up in the financial statements, but I did. I felt it was important, and in fact, all of the senior executive had a pay freeze during that year.
What would be the percentile in pay freeze across the board? For the
Well,
executives?
a freeze means no increase,
Yeah.
but in my case, I received about 18% less during that year than,
Okay.
and in fact, my salary hasn't increased by very much since I started 4 years ago. So, and that's been deliberate, because I'm aware that, you know, there's a lot of attention paid to these things. I think the question is, what's your point of reference? You mentioned the Prime Minister's salary. I'm a lawyer by background. If I was in legal practice, I'd be earning a lot more than I'm earning in this job. And I think it's a question of, you know, how the kind of talent you want to attract into the top roles.
Would that be, could we make the same argument for teachers and staff at the university? Because a lot of staff are being put on casualisation contracts, and that's been trouble for students as well. They can't reach their teachers 7 days a week like they used to be able to when they're only on casual employments. And perhaps it should be increased or given more people given more full time. Otherwise, that way we can attract better people to teach students.
Well, we're always looking to ensure that our pay rates are competitive, and that's a matter that we negotiate with the union as part of the collective agreement, and we're just about to kick that process off again. I share your concern about casualisation, actually.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that we want to be talking and probably with the union about is how we can address that. And you know, we have to do it within the budget envelope that we have. But I agree that addressing the quality of teaching is going to be in part about addressing the support and engagement of casual staff with the university.
A lot of the Future Ready is about getting people prepared for jobs after they've finished their degree. We know, especially for us in the journalism media department, there's not that many jobs out there in the future. You've talked about some of the sectors or some of the degrees in the university have had to cut back, so they haven't had as much enrolments. Where do you see journalism placing in the big field of La Trobe? Is there room for it to continue to be funded and given more facilities, or is it something that's probably going to get cut back in the future for something else?
Look, I think the journalism programme's a terrific programme. It's just been reviewed, actually, and very positively reviewed. We're very fortunate with the academic staff we have, and I think they have worked really hard to develop some very strong industry links, which we know helps students find employment. I'm not particularly well qualified to talk about the future of journalism more generally, but I actually think the skills of journalists are going to be in ever more demand rather than less. I think the settings in which those skills will be employed will change. Clearly the print media is under a lot of pressure, and we're probably in a period of transition to other forms of media, but we know that you know, there are a lot of new forms of media that will take the place of the print media as it declines. So I'd be quite optimistic, actually, about the future for journalism as a set of skills. Whether people with those skills would be called journalists working for a newspaper is another matter. But I think, and that's one of the things that this degree is designed to try and prepare students for, is the changing media landscape and the different media organisations.
So do you see journalism and media continuing to be supported by the university?
Absolutely, and in fact we're just about to invest in a major TV studio in the Agora. So if you wanted to see signs of a gesture of confidence in the future of the programme, that would be it.
Definitely. Now, on Wednesday afternoon, you were the moderator of a discussion which focused on the US documentary The Hunting Grounds and how Australian tertiary providers can help prevent violence and sexual assaults on campus. I've seen in the media you've talked about this before, but we didn't quite get a plan on how La Trobe is planning to address that. How is La Trobe planning to diminish violence against women and sexual assaults on campus?
So the first thing I'd like to say is that any form of sexual violence, particularly on this campus, but anywhere, is unacceptable. And I think the most important thing we can do as a start is to communicate that very clearly to everyone in this community. The question of how we then address that practically is an issue that is currently being looked at by a project called Project Unified, which is led by Corinne Manning, who's Deputy Director in HR, with a team to support her. And they will be coming back in the near future with a set of recommendations about how we best do this. There are a lot of things we can do to improve how we respond to and prevent sexual violence on campus. For example, Corinne was telling me yesterday that we currently have 37 different systems for notifying to the university that there has been an incident. Well, that's ridiculous. You can't have a sensible, coherent system with that number of different ways of notification for notification. So there'll be a lot of practical steps that we can take. We can improve the training of security staff. We can improve lighting. We can improve ways of raising the alarm if necessary. But in the end, this comes down to quite deep-seated questions of culture and power, which I think were some of the topics that were being discussed at yesterday's forum. And I think a university does have a role to try and educate students about those quite deep-seated issues in our community, about what we expect of each other when it comes to sexual matters, and being clear about the consequences that will be visited on people should they cross the line.
Is there a timeline for implementing these suggestions by Corinne Manning? When she'll come back to you with the recommendations?
She will, yeah. So I'm expecting her to come back in the next couple of months. You'll then see a very visible campaign rolled out across the university. We're joining with Universities Australia in their Respect Now Always campaign, which was triggered in part by the hunting ground. So you will see a La Trobe version of Respect Now Always, which will be a big publicity push, really promulgating acceptable standards of behaviour.
One of the big things I've seen mentioned by all the campaigns being run by the National Union of Students is better lighting around campuses. Because as we heard yesterday in the talk, there are certain circumstances where it's easier to prey upon people, I suppose, and better lighting would probably make it easier for people, late at night and in the middle of winter, La Trobe can be pretty dark and cold.
Yes.
Is that something that you're looking at?
Yes.
Better lighting? And when can we see better lighting put around campus? How soon?
I'll have to take that question on notice. I
Right.
actually don't know the answer to that, but I'd be happy to get back to you.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, John. It was a pleasure having you on here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you.